Inside a secured forensic examination facility, investigators stood around a vehicle that had quietly become one of the most important pieces of evidence in a disappearance that still had no clear explanation. The car itself looked ordinary. There were no broken windows, no visible damage, no obvious signs that anything unusual had ever happened inside it. To anyone passing by, it would appear to be just another vehicle sitting inside a garage. But detectives working the case knew that vehicles often hold something far more important than appearances. They hold traces, tiny fragments of material that move from one place to another without anyone noticing. Fibers from clothing, dust from the ground, microscopic particles from objects that may have been inside the car for only a few minutes. Sometimes those fragments can reveal where a vehicle has traveled. Sometimes they can reveal who or what has been inside it. And sometimes they answer the question investigators have been asking from the very beginning. What happened? Before we continue, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. What city are you in right now? What country are you in? And what time is it where you are? Cases like this reach people all over the world, and this community has followed investigations like this closely from the beginning. If you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future updates. Now let us get into the case. When investigators began looking into the disappearance, their first task was establishing a timeline. They needed to understand the final hours before the individual vanished, where they had been, who they had spoken to, and what movements could be confirmed. In most investigations, detectives begin by speaking with the people closest to the missing person. Family members, friends, neighbors, anyone who might have seen or heard something during the hours surrounding the disappearance. These conversations help investigators build a sequence of events. Each statement becomes part of a timeline that detectives can compare with physical evidence. But timelines are rarely perfect. People forget details. Memories can change. Sometimes witnesses unknowingly provide incomplete information. That is why investigators often rely on physical evidence to verify the movements within a case. And one of the most common places to search for that evidence is inside a vehicle. Cars move between locations. They collect traces of the environments they pass through. Dust from a roadside, soil from a parking lot, fragments of plant material carried in on someone's shoes. All of these materials can remain inside a vehicle long after the journey is over. For detectives trying to reconstruct events, that makes vehicles extremely valuable. Because even when people leave a car, the evidence they carried with them sometimes stays behind. In this investigation, one particular vehicle became part of the timeline detectives were studying. Investigators did not immediately assume it was connected to the disappearance, but they knew that examining it carefully could either provide new information or eliminate one possibility entirely. And in criminal investigations, eliminating possibilities is often just as important as discovering evidence. The vehicle was transported to a forensic facility where specialists could examine it under controlled conditions. Before the search began, technicians documented every part of the car. Photographs were taken from multiple angles. The exterior was recorded. The condition of the tires was noted. Even the position of objects inside the vehicle was documented exactly as investigators found them. This process might seem routine, but it serves a crucial purpose. Forensic examinations must preserve the original state of an object, before evidence collection begins. Once documentation was complete, investigators began preparing for the part of the investigation that could potentially reveal something important: the forensic search. Because somewhere inside that vehicle could be a fragment of information investigators had not yet discovered. A fragment small enough to escape notice, but important enough to change the direction of the entire investigation. A forensic vehicle search does not happen quickly. Unlike the way evidence is sometimes portrayed in television dramas, real forensic examinations are slow and methodical. Every part of the vehicle must be examined carefully, because the evidence investigators are searching for is often invisible to the human eye. The search began with the exterior. Technicians examine the tires first. Tire treads often collect debris from roads and parking areas. Small stones, dirt, and plant material can remain trapped there, even after a vehicle has traveled long distances. Investigators collected samples of the debris and placed them in evidence containers. These materials would later be analyzed in a laboratory to determine their composition. Sometimes soil samples contain unique combinations of minerals that can be traced to specific environments. If those materials match soil from another location connected to the case, investigators can sometimes determine that the vehicle traveled there. After the tires were examined, investigators moved underneath the vehicle. The undercarriage can collect mud, dust, and other environmental materials that are difficult to remove completely. Using specialized tools, technicians collected small samples of debris from these areas. Each sample was carefully labeled. Every step was documented. Once the exterior examination was complete, investigators turned their attention to the interior of the car. This is often where the most important evidence is found. Seats were inspected first. Seat seams and upholstery fibers can trap microscopic materials from clothing or objects that were inside the vehicle. Technicians used adhesive lifting strips to collect fibers from the surface of the seats. These strips act almost like tape, capturing tiny threads or particles that may have been left behind. Each strip was sealed in a container and labeled according to the location where it was collected. From there, investigators examined the floor area. Floor mats were removed and inspected separately. Dust and debris beneath the mats were collected. Sometimes these materials contain small fragments of plants or soil that can help investigators identify where the vehicle has been. Next, technicians examined the door panels and handles. These surfaces are important because they are touched frequently. When a person touches a surface, microscopic skin cells can transfer onto it. Under the right conditions, those cells can later be analyzed for DNA. But investigators must be careful when interpreting DNA evidence. A DNA trace can show that someone had contact with a surface, but it does not always reveal exactly when that contact occurred. Because of that, forensic results are always considered alongside other evidence in the investigation. The final area investigators examined was the trunk. In many cases, the trunk becomes one of the most important parts of a vehicle search. Objects placed inside a trunk often leave microscopic traces behind. Fibers from clothing, dust from bags or containers, fragments of plant material or soil. Even if those objects remain inside the trunk for only a short time, the traces they leave behind can remain. Inside the trunk, investigators followed the same careful procedures used throughout the vehicle. Photographs were taken before anything was moved. The lining material covering the trunk floor was examined closely. Technicians used adhesive strips to lift fibers from the surface. Special vacuum devices equipped with fine filters collected dust from corners and seams. Every sample was placed into evidence containers and labeled, because the real analysis would occur later, inside a forensic laboratory. In the laboratory, specialists would examine the collected materials under powerful microscopes. Fibers could be compared with known fabrics. Soil particles could be analyzed for mineral composition. Plant fragments could be identified and compared with vegetation from locations investigators were studying. This process can take time, sometimes days, sometimes weeks. But investigators understood that the results could answer a critical question. Had anything connected to the disappearance been inside that vehicle? If the laboratory results revealed materials connected to the missing person or a location relevant to the investigation, detectives would need to determine how those materials arrived there. But investigators were also prepared for another possibility. The possibility that the forensic examination might reveal nothing linking the vehicle to the disappearance at all. And in some ways, that result could be just as important. Because in criminal investigations, ruling out possibilities helps detectives focus on the leads that remain. While the laboratory analysis continued, investigators reviewed other aspects of the case. Witness statements were examined again. Timelines were compared with phone record. As the forensic analysis continued, investigators began preparing for the possibility that the evidence collected from the vehicle might significantly affect the direction of the investigation. If the laboratory results revealed materials connected to the disappearance, detectives would need to examine the timeline carefully. They would review travel routes, analyze surveillance footage, compare witness statements with the new evidence. But investigators also knew that the results might lead them somewhere else entirely. If the forensic examination revealed no connection between the vehicle and the disappearance, it would remove one possible explanation from the case. That might not solve the mystery immediately, but it would help investigators narrow the search. Because in many investigations, the truth emerges through the gradual process of eliminating possibilities. Each piece of evidence helps detectives understand what may have happened. Each lead either strengthens a theory or removes it entirely. For now, the disappearance remains a mystery investigators are still trying to solve. Detectives continue reviewing evidence, examining timelines, and following leads that might explain what happened during the hours before the individual vanished. And somewhere within that growing collection of information may be the detail investigators need. A fragment of evidence small enough to escape notice, but important enough to reveal the truth. Until that discovery is made, the question remains: what really happened? And could the evidence investigators have already collected still hold the answer? But the inspection of the car inside the evidence facility marked only the beginning of a much longer process. Recovering materials from the vehicle was important, but determining their significance required detailed examination inside a controlled laboratory environment. Every trace collected during the search had to be evaluated carefully by specialists trained to interpret even the smallest details. The items gathered from the seats, interior surfaces, and storage compartment were sealed and transported to a forensic lab where technicians began documenting each sample. Before analysis could begin, every container had to be recorded and tracked to maintain a clear chain of custody. This step ensures that investigators can later verify the origin of every sample and confirm that it was handled correctly throughout the process. After documentation was completed, analysts began the meticulous task of examining the materials using specialized equipment. Textile fragments were among the first items reviewed. Under magnification, experts can study the structure of individual strands. Subtle characteristics such as color patterns, weave style, and thickness may indicate the type of fabric the fragment came from, and whether it corresponds with clothing or objects linked to the investigation. Researchers then turn their attention to environmental residue recovered from the interior. Small particles of dust, soil, and organic debris were separated and studied to determine their properties. Although these fragments can appear insignificant, they sometimes reveal whether a vehicle passed through a particular setting or carried materials originating from another place. Each finding was carefully documented. Because forensic science rarely produces instant answers. Instead, conclusions emerge gradually as specialists evaluate one observation after another. And in many investigations, it is those seemingly minor details that help reconstruct events that were never directly witnessed. For the detectives assigned to the case, this stage of analysis represented another step toward understanding the sequence of events. Whether the findings revealed a connection or ruled one out, they would help narrow the possibilities and guide investigators closer to the truth about what had happened.